Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon make their way towards an isolated village situated between two lofty mountain peaks, on the way passing by an ominous swamp. And there, near what looks like an abandoned village, they find a beast tied up there so it can barely move to forage. Walking between the dilapidated houses they realize that no one is there, and that clearly no one has been there for several years. Although Qui-Gon warns of something ominous, but Obi-Wan says they cannot leave the creature there, and releases the animal, and then they remount, and move on. After another hour of travel they arrive at the village, where they seek to acquire supplies for the long journey back to their ship. It is a modest village of just a couple dozen thatched houses, with a voluminous meeting hall dominating them all. One of the families invites them to take up for the night at their home, and Qui-Gon goes with them while Obi-Wan goes to seek out their provisions. Qui-Gon is taken to a house situated partway up the rise, modest, but with ample room within for the two of them in a spare room. There live only a mother named Lycra, and her son named Dark. Obi-Wan eventually returns carrying a huge and heavy pile of supplies, saying he couldn't have carried it all on his own without the aid of the Force. While they are having dinner, Dark tells them about the Yugen, a creature who comes out of the swamps at night to capture children, and take them back to his swamp. They smile at one another, thinking it merely an invented creature to scare children. But Tark tells them that the villagers leave an animal fort close by the swamp, so that it doesn't bother them. Obi-Wan glances at Qui-Gon, then asks if anyone has ever actually seen this creature, and he says that it has not bothered them for years, but they have always left an animal there, and must replace it every 3 months. Obi-Wan's face goes blank, thinking he should mention that he let the animal loose, but after dinner speaks to Qui-Gon about it. Qui-Gon seems somewhat concerned. He certainly feels something about the place, as he had before, but says if anything comes near he will sense it. The Emerald Swamp is not so very far from their house, only a few miles deep and dank, while at the same time giving off an eerie green glow at night. Obi-Wan can see the glow far off through their window, before he shuts it, smiling to himself. But something staggers through the cloudy, stagnant water, dark and clawed, stepping out upon the ground and hissing. Tark is sleeping in his room when a shadow passes by his window. Qui-Gon is sleeping, but then his eyes open suddenly, and he jumps out of bed. He moves to Obi-Wan, and shakes him out of his sleeping. Qui-Gon is already holding his lightsaber hilt, and moves out into the house silently. He hears a sound like a serpent, and when he goes to Tark's room, he finds a shadowy creature bending over him. It turns about in the darkness and hisses at him, but when Qui-Gon ignites his saber and Obi-Wan steps in with his, it rapidly leaps out the window. Obi-Wan runs out after it while Qui-Gon goes to the boy. He is bleeding. Qui-Gon attempts at once to halt the bleeding. Obi-Wan enters and says he could not see it outside, and asks if he thinks it was the Yugen. Qui-Gon gives him a quick warning, and asks him to go and fetch some of their medical supplies. He goes out and then the mother enters, running to her boy. Qui-Gon says he is alive, but has lost a bit of blood. She knows that it is the Yugen, and then Qui-Gon tells her that they are responsible for its arrival, but they promise to deal with this terror, and help her boy. She tells him that in the stories of the Yugen, that no one was found alive afterwards, but he says that they got to him in time. She mentions a medicinal plant that exists out in the woods she must find. Obi-Wan returns with a pack for Qui-Gon, then he asks him to accompany the woman to find this healing herb. Something watches them from a distance as they walk into the woods nearby, tense and with dark, hungry eyes. Obi-Wan goes with Lurka through the woods with a lamp. The woman looks around for it, while Obi-Wan watches, telling her that they must have scared the creature off. The next day the boy is still lying on his bed, and his mother looks from outside with concern for him as Qui-Gon checks him, asking if they have a doctor. They have no one, but Qui-Gon tells her that there is nothing more that they can do for him. But that if the creature didn't find something else to feed upon, it may come back tonight, and it is absolutely imperative that Tark not be attacked again. So several volunteer to take watches that night, and they bring the people together into their meeting hall to keep watch over them all. Qui-Gon is sitting on the porch. When he sees something moving near, he senses it, then recognizes the man guarding near the animal barn. Qui-Gon is just turning to go back when a hand grabs him and clamps down upon his arm with a painful grip, causing him to drop his lightsaber. The other man runs up and fires his gun at it several times, but it has no effect upon it. Qui-Gon holds off the creature with his hands, telling the man to grab his lightsaber. He attempts to find it, but cannot see it in the dark. Just then a lightsaber blade comes crashing down, severing the monster's forearm. It is Obi-Wan's saber. He then sweeps down again on the creature's shoulder, and its flesh steams, and then it runs off quickly into the profound darkness. Qui-Gon is writhing on the ground, and tells Obi-Wan he must go and chase it to find its lair. Obi-Wan hesitates for a moment, then heads away after it. Qui-Gon remains there until he is gone, and then stands up easily. The man asks him if they should go to help the other fellow, but he says that this is a challenge that Obi-Wan must face alone. Qui-Gon reaches out and draws his lightsaber to his hand, then sits himself down and goes into a trance. Obi-Wan is on the trail of the beast, which is moving several yards in front of him, but he can still hear it when he halts. He also hears the sounds of other beasts in the forest. He eventually tracks it to the swamp, where he loses it. So he closes his eyes to sense the creature, and then moves forward into the water cautiously. He continues until he reaches an open space at the center of a group of tall trees. Then it rises up out of the muddy pool, dark and dripping wet, but with only its one arm raised. It then jumps onto Obi-Wan, and his lightsaber goes splashing into the pool, making the water boil, but his face is also driven underwater. The creature is heavy, but he is able to stand back up since the thing cannot get a solid grip on him, but his lightsaber is lost in the water. Obi-Wan looks for it and reaches for a stick which he uses like a club, but the Yugen's arm is able to grab it and pull it from his hands. Their struggle continues until the creature has grabbed Obi-Wan and pinned him against a tree. Obi-Wan reaches out in an attempt to draw his sword into his hand, but he is too fearful of the creature. Out from it comes an orifice at the end of a tube. But Obi-Wan is able to reach to a branch and kick the creature away momentarily. Then, overcoming his fear, he calls his light sword to his hand through the force. The creature grabs him, but he manages to activate it, bringing it down hard onto the creature's shoulder, causing it to drop Obi-Wan, who then rises up and slices off its head. The creature stands momentarily before collapsing into the swamp and sinking right down into the murky morass. Everything is quiet now, and Obi-Wan gets his breath back and pulls himself, exhausted, from the water onto a muddy bank. Then he goes over to retrieve the creature's head. At dawn, Qui-Gon comes out of his trance. Obi-Wan makes his way back out through the swamp and arrives at the meeting hall. He comes up the steps and carries in the monster's head, passing it to Qui-Gon as proof that it is killed. Qui-Gon already knows something and his response is muted. Obi-Wan asks about the boy, but Qui-Gon is sullen, unsure. Inside, Obi-Wan is speaking of the creature and what happened, then notices the arm, but it is not a reptile's arm, but a robotic arm. Obi-Wan says he doesn't understand, but Qui-Gon is cleaning away the accumulations of mud and weed from off the head and shows him. He is startled. Obi-Wan says it's one of the robots, like they found eroding out of the desert sands. Obi-Wan then recognizes and says to Qui-Gon that he already knew. Qui-Gon tells him that during his trance he established contact with its mind and learned what had happened to it. That after these robots had killed every inhabitant of that forsaken village, they determined that they would go no further and rather destroy themselves. Obi-Wan asks about this, that this was one of the robots, one of the children from that village. Qui-Gon says that when they ran out of the fluid they were forced to drink the blood of their own people. Eventually they were unable to live with the guilt in their minds and committed mass suicide rather than carry on killing for their survival. But this one came from a girl younger than the others and could not kill herself, so then she wandered off and came here, but has had to go out seeking what it was lacking, the blood it required to keep itself alive. They discover that the fill hose is what was used to suck the blood, and when Lycra asks what a droid would need with blood, Qui-Gon removes the top of the head, and within is a human brain. Obi-Wan asks if there are any more of these robots alive, but Qui-Gon answers, no, this is the last, they have put this final one to rest. Obi-Wan chastises himself for not having attempted to establish communication with it, so intent was he on finding it and killing it. But Qui-Gon tells him there is nothing he could have done. The creature was then over 200 years old and had been reduced to the mentality of an animal, acting purely from its base instincts. Obi-Wan is overcome and bursts out in crying, leaving the room. Obi-Wan goes outside, takes his lightsaber off his belt and tossing it away, then collapses against a fence. Qui-Gon exits the hall, while Obi-Wan is devastated for what he has done, having killed one of those poor children. Qui-Gon says there is nothing you could have done for her. But Obi-Wan says that he doesn't think he can go on and become a Jedi. Qui-Gon tells him that being a Jedi is never easy, and never will be, then tells him that besides it's too late, Jedi Kenobi. Obi-Wan is startled at this, as Qui-Gon picks up Obi-Wan's sword. Obi-Wan says that despite what happened he is a Jedi, and Qui-Gon says, because of what happened. Qui-Gon says they can only fight evil without bringing into being even more evil. Evil begets evil, he says, and this is precisely what Obi-Wan has done, and congratulates him. Obi-Wan takes his saber back, but hardly feels a sense of accomplishment. They remain for the burial of the creature in the village cemetery. Tark has now fully recovered and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan say goodbye to him and his mother, and to the thankful people. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon then get upon their mounts and go on their way, waving goodbye to the crowd of villagers watching them go. Qui-Gon says to Obi-Wan that every act of good, every act of kindness they do makes a difference.